All right, so I'm going to be touching up a portrait today, and all right, so I'm going to be touching up a portrait today, and I'm also going to introduce to you the idea of masking and the technique of masking and what that means, and start trying to focus our types of edits to what's called non-destructive editing, which means that the integrity of the picture isn't being affected. It also means essentially, if you mess up, you don't have to start over. There's no such thing as permanently erasing something. You can bring things back and forth. Okay. Okay. So, as I usually do, I'm going to always, again, I'm just showing you that I'll always make sure that I fix the profile corrections from the lens and the body of the camera, as well as distortion and vignetting, right? The chromatic aberration, I always make sure that those are turned on. This was a portrait, this was a headshot given to me. This one wanted to use it as her headshot for being a comedian, and this was a photograph someone else took that she wanted me to retouch. We can see by looking at it that the figure is very dark, the background is very bright, right? And there's like some things we could touch up here. She asked me to do things like beautify her skin, make her look like she's wearing makeup, that kind of a thing when I got this. She's wearing a little bit, but not much. Her skin's dark, that kind of thing. So I would start, of course, by trying to be a little flexible with the raw menu and trying to make sure I bring things out the best that I can. All right, and I think that this is a fine place to start. But I still think that the background's a little bit too bright, very much too bright, and the figure's too dark. So for sake of going over it again, we're going to use the adjustment brush in the raw menu, and I'm going to affect both aspects of this picture, both her and the background. So I'm just going to kind of just eyeball these settings, because of course I can always change it. And I'm going to use this tool to brighten her up. I told you today we're going to learn a little more about masking, and technically that's what I'm doing right now. I'm masking in that adjustment. If you want to see what the mask is, you can toggle this on and off. You can see where it's present, add more to where you want to fill that in. Photoshop is pretty good at finding the edges that you want in this particular menu. So you can kind of be a little loose about how you fill that, because it should find, you can see here how it kind of stayed in those edges. So I think that she still needs to be a little brighter. So I'm just putting some light on her. That's already much better. The screen's a little dark for you guys that you're watching, but you can already see the difference. And essentially now what I've done is I've exposed her by a whole stop without affecting the background. And I'm going to actually do it again and do exactly the opposite. And I'm going to paint the background now. Remember, right bracket is to increase the size, and left bracket is to make it smaller for your brush size. So I'm just now adding this to the background. And again, I'm just trying to push her forward. The background was borderline distracting by its brightness and the vibrance of the color. All right, so that's already largely and wildly better, in my opinion, compared to the original exposure. Again, it's a little dark for you on your screen compared to my screen, but there's nothing I can do to try to repair that, really. Yeah, so this is pretty good for me so far. We're already at a much better place than before. So let's open this. Apologies, guys. Okay. All right. So we're going to open this. All right. So as I have always mentioned before, I always make a copy of the background layer first. Command J is just going to make a copy of that. You can always just duplicate it by right-clicking. But if you really want to get your workflow to be speedy, I suggest you start learning shortcuts when I tell you what it is. It's because it's an easy one to remember. So Command J to make a new layer here. All right, so some of the things I'm going to do is beautifying with the spot healing brush tool. I'll add a little bit of rouge and make her lips a little bit more red. We're going to do a little bit of dodging and burning to make it look that light on her face pop a little bit more. And I'll show you preliminary masking. So let's start with, again, I'm just going to copy this one more time. And I usually retitle it so that I know exactly what each layer is for, especially when I'm working directly on the image and I'm not making a separate layer file. I always want to write out what it's doing here. So this is the beautify layer, which means I'm going to make her all nice and pretty and dolled up. I can see also here by looking at it that her face isn't actually what's totally in focus. It's this right here. These parts of the plants, you can see they're like real sharp. So I'm going to try to push those and soften those and push those back, as well as sharpen her to bring her forward, okay? So I'm going to start by taking a couple of these marks off of her face with the healing brush tool. Her cheek's a really nice smooth spot, so I'll use that to get my samples. And I'm just going to start removing some of these very, very small wrinkles here and blemishes on her face, and try to soften the skin a little bit. That's already much better in my opinion. All right, and if you ever want to toggle back and forth to see that, you can already see the difference that I got from that, all right? Then I would probably duplicate that layer one more time and do another beautify. This one will be for her, the color in her face. So you can see here I already have a really nice bright red selected. And I'm going to put my brush on hue. And I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. And I'm going to make her reds, the reds in her lips come out just a little more. I'm going to bring this up. And push this out. I'm actually going to add also a little bit of the color to it. That's too much. Bring the opacity down a little bit. And just try to add a little bit more color to her mouth. I'm going to do this really sloppy so I can use this opportunity to show you the history brush tool again. So I'm just going to really go for it here and just overline, all right? And now what you can do is with this history brush tool, it's fabulous in so many ways. This is one of the fine ways to use it. I have my history brush tool. You can see here it has that backwards in time symbol. This is going to be where your history panel is, and here is a list of every time I've clicked the button. So I can go back in time and see here, like, okay, so the brush tool is when I was applying the red to her mouth. So I'm going to mark here. And now with this tool, let's put it up to 100%. I can go back here and just erase where I overlined here and just clean up that edit I just added in here. So pushing things back and forth like that can be really, really great and really easy to do. I also personally think that she's still a little bit too red there, so I'm just going to actually go over her whole mouth with the opacity down here at like 6% and just bring that down just a little bit because I think it's a little too much color here. All right, and now we have a really nice bright lip color here on her that wasn't present before. I'm even going to use this color to add a little bit of color to her cheeks here. So we'll use, again, color. I'm going to bring this down even a little more. And I'm going to feather it It's already very feathered. That's great. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color to her cheeks here. All right, and that already made a huge change. I actually think it's a little too much. But this is kind of how you do these kind of changes. You make the change you're looking for, and then you push it back and forth to make sure you're getting what you want. And now she's got a little bit of a flush to her face. Again, I think it's still a little bit too much. I would probably still bring it down. But we're off to a great start here. Okay, so what else would I do? I would be dodging and burning her face. So let's go over those tools. As I mentioned previously, the burn tool makes things darker and the dodge tool makes things brighter. And I'm going to apply it directly to this image, not as a separate layer quite yet. So let's see, I would dodge her teeth out a little bit, make that a little bit brighter, make her teeth really pop. Not too much to look too fake, but enough to make them bright and look like her face was actually lit with something. I'm going to shape her face a little bit. Again, this might be something that might be a little easier for women than men, at least inherently because of the way that makeup is put on. But I'm going to try to increase some of the light on her face by painting on this light. This would be in places where you'd want some extra light. That's a little too much. So I'm just starting to add a little bit of light to areas that she needs it. She was shot in shadow. It was very flat. I don't like that one. And so now I'm just pushing back and forth, trying to bring a little bit of dimension to her face here. And give her a little bit of a volume to her face. So I'm going to, of course, standard spots where highlights put, ladies, right, where you're going to want to bring that out, as well as the actual eye shape itself. An eye that's too much in shadow looks dead, although an eye that's too bright looks like she's an animated version of herself, right, a rendering, if you will. So you don't want to do that either. But a little bit of brightness is good. I constantly find myself toggling back and forth to make sure that I don't hate the difference or that I'm not making too much of a difference at one time. I'm bringing out these highlighted parts of hair on her face. All right, we're getting a little bit more dimension here, much better. If you were really looking to beautify her, you could, of course, remove these bags, right, not only by spot healing that out and putting something smoother there, but also by taking the blue out, right, if you're really looking to have that kind of really intense, kind of high-end, very extreme retouching, you could do so. And then, of course, I would use the burn tool to really increase where the shadows should be already present. So I'll try to push her neck a little bit farther back from under her chin because they were both the same color before. I'll probably go around this side of her face to really just make her face catch her eye the most, right, by bringing out the shadow that's around that. All right. But of course, depending on what the person is, you can chisel them a little bit with the burn tool, right? Bring out their smile lines if you wanted to do that. That's great. All right, I just went over the shadows in her mouth to really, again, make her teeth pop. Ladies, of course, you could go around where the mascara would be and try to darken that up a little bit. Just things like that. Just to make the face a little bit more noticeable and a little more perfect looking, right? And now we're actually, compared to before, this is where we started, right? For as much as we've touched it up, it's not too apparent yet, right? You can tell when we switch back and forth, but not when you directly look at it. And I think this is a really great place so far. So what I'm going to do next is show you a couple ways that I would choose how to sharpen and soften this. All right, so what I'll do first is select her as well as I can. If I were doing this to turn in, to a teacher or for my own piece of art, I'd probably be going a little slower here and meticulously getting this as perfect as possible. But for the sake of the tutorial not taking forever, I am only going to go so hard on this. All right, so this is fine right now. I'll get rid of these highlighted spots here that I don't want. That's part of the background. All right. And I'm going to save this selection. So under the selection drop-down menu, which of course has to do with your selection processes, you're going to do save selection. I'm just going to put figure. All right, and now I always have that available to me, so I don't have to keep reselecting her every time I want to work on her. I can just load the selection, pick figure. All right. I could also, of course, do the inverse, and then I would have a selection just for the background. And that's going to make it much easier for me to do some edits here now that I've had both of those selected. So I'm going to select her. And I'm going to make a copy from this. Oops. Because I don't want to sharpen the whole thing. I just want to sharpen her. And the first thing I'm going to try to sharpen would be with what's called high pass. High pass looks at all of the edges here, and it's going to find where there are edges, specifically by looking for a difference in value between 2 pixels, right? So it's able to find where there's a shadow or highlight. And it increases the contrast of that. We're going to go over blending modes next week. And I've discussed them very briefly before. But as I mentioned, this is the darkening blending modes. This is a lightening blending mode. And these are what's called contrast blending modes. So essentially, the contrast blending mode it starts with a middle gray, which you can see this is. And anything that's lighter than middle gray gets highlighted, and anything that's under middle gray becomes darker. All right. So I'm going to toggle between these. That's way too sharp for me. That's actually really nice. And so you can kind of decide how you would want to do that. And I think that this one's pretty good. And so you can see how she looks just a little sharper now compared to before. I'll zoom in to show you that also without it, with it, right? So there's just a little bit more life in her now. And I think that's fine. I probably would bring it down a little bit. In all honesty, I wouldn't just stop there, but for this one, I'm going to now. I would also take my selection, load the background, make a copy of that, and I could try softening it with the blur. Gaussian blur is kind of the go-to for these kind of things, and I'll blur it. So here's what it's showing us. That's pretty good by me. All right, and now we've applied that blur to the background. So now she's really in front of our vision between adding that extra light and adding that sharpness, taking the sharpness away from these other things that were very much in detail before. All right, so what else can we do here? Well, I would, one of the things that I can see here by turning this on and off and turning this on and off is I don't have her hair quite well selected here. And in all honesty, using a high pass filter over someone's skin without removing it just a little bit can sometimes be kind of sharp and not attractive. High pass is great for hair and eyelashes and stuff like that, but on your skin it's not always attractive. And you can see how when I zoom in here how it's only doing her so much of a service with her skin. So what I would do is make what's called a layer mask, all right? So what we've been reviewing before in terms of adding and removing information to your pictures is by using the eraser and then adding things and using the eraser to remove, right? When you have a layer mask, you use the paintbrush tool. Black is to remove, white is to add, and that means nothing is ever permanently removed from your picture. You can always push things back and forth. It's going to save you time to be able to do this. So a layer mask can be made by pushing this button right here, like the black and white Chinese flag, all right? And I'm going to make a layer mask to both of these. And what I would do here now is using the paintbrush on black, I'll bring up the opacity a little bit. And I'm going to remove some of the sharpening that's happened on her face on that high pass and just try to push that back and soften her skin a little bit because, well, that's what you would want. I won't do it too much to her eyelashes, but I will do it to, like, you know, parts where there might be wrinkles or spots on the skin and soften that just a little bit. I also think personally that her tattoo is a little distracting. Not in a bad way, but it's a little colorful with the sharpening. It kind of is eye-catching. you want to get to the face. So I'll soften that just a little bit also. And that's starting to look really nice to me. Let's see. Yeah, much better. All right. That's pretty much everything that I want to show you. You can see here, speaking of layer masks, that every adjustment layer is already a masked layer. That's why it has this black and white here. You can see where I've applied the black. That means as parts are removed. You can see where there's like, you can see where I've made those marks here. So if I wanted to, you know, maybe make her pop out a little bit more by increasing saturation in her figure, then I can make an overall adjustment layer. However, when I'm making these changes, I'm only looking at her. I'm not looking at the background because I'm going to remove that, all right? Now I can select my background, load selection, background, all right? And essentially I can just paint in this black and it's going to remove that adjustment layer in that portion. I don't know if you can see on your screen, but you could see that really bright green and yellow really go down. And you can see here how it's only affecting her as the figure. It is a little too much for me, in my opinion. I would bring it down a little more. But now it looks really great. And in all honesty, if I were going to finish this with the brief edits I've made, I would probably crop it so that way she's a little bit more centered for a headshot like this. And we're done. All right. You could, of course, you know, continue to dodge and burn things like this part of her arm, for example, to just bring that out a little bit more too, right? And things like that, of course, are also a really nice way to try to make things look really dimensional. Like I said, kind of painting light, if you will. Great, yeah. That's all I want to show you for this. There's still so much more to go over, but there has to be a stopping point every week, right? So, okay. Excellent. Again, to review one more time, this is how you make that layer mask, okay? And you're using your paintbrush with black and white, okay, to push and bring that out and push that away. So that is that.